Without inner change, there can be no outer change. Without collective change, no change matters. Angel Kyoto Williams. We're in week 6, Spiritual Allyship, Moving Towards Systemic Change, Part 2. Welcome. Yay! And we're going to take a moment to light our candle and create a container for grief. Just a reminder why we're doing this, because we are creating a new culture. This course is bringing us through learning how to take care of ourselves in such a way that we can create this container for everybody in the world to come on board and be able to feel like there's a place for grief. And we are the first cohort doing this. We're starting this process of creating this container. So as we get into our symbolic ritual of lighting our own candle and connecting with each other, really feel the ripples of that flame going out and touching us all over the world and connecting us and creating a container. Beautiful. So today we're going to start with a tuning in. We'll check in about this past week. We're going to do a little bit of a review and then pop into today's material. And no matter what we do today, we will always, always, through and through, open ourselves to love and end with love. Start with love, all the way through with love, end with love. Because that, my friends, is where it's at. And let's start with a tuning in. All right. So get yourself in meditation mood, whatever that means for you. Something where your back is fairly straight. Maybe your feet are on the floor or they're crossed up into a cross-legged position, whatever's comfortable. And then imagine that there's a little hand coming from the heavens and holding your head and lifting it up. And your head becomes a helium balloon lifting up, and the body is the string hanging down. We'll start opening into the feeling of lengthening, vertebrae opening, and widening, opening up the chest, the shoulders, the ribs, the hips. And becoming more expanded. And notice the breath as it breathes in and out of the body. Notice that it's the same air inside the body and outside the body. The same air, the same exchange is going on for each one of us in the same air. We're breathing in and out with the plants and with each other, with other animals, with the water, the earth, the sky. We're all breathing in and out of the same energetic field. And just know that we all want the same things. We all want to feel safe. We all want to feel happy. We all want to be well. We all want to experience peace and feel at ease. And you may want to say a little mantra right now that expresses this. May we all be happy. May we all be well. May we all be safe. May we all be peaceful and at ease. And as you come back into this moment, this group, bring that with you as much as you can. Bring your inner vision and your outer vision together as you start to open your eyes. Bringing that, what's called metta meditation or loving kindness meditation, that mantra, that hope, that prayer, bringing that with you. We're going to stand up. Take some conscious breaths with our body. So inhale the arms up. Exhale the shoulders down. Inhale the ribs wide. Exhale and hum. Inhale up. Exhale the shoulders down. Inhale the ribs wide. Exhale and hum. One more time. Inhale up. And I invite you to continue. You can stand, you can stretch, you can qigong shake, you can do whatever feels right for your body right now as I move us forward to a little review. So we've been talking about how our body, our system is like a glass, a container that stress is being poured into. And that to manage this, we have to pour out some stress every day throughout the day, and sometimes empty all that stress out, get rid of it all the way flat out, and move towards systemic change to make that a little easier for everybody, take away some systemic stress that we don't need. And we talked about doing this by moving out through the physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, energetic bodies, keeping a list of these things, checking your list, doing what's on the list every day, adding to it as you figure out more ways to release stress. We also talked about how cumulative stress can become trauma. That's one way of trauma entering the body and staying in the body. And how if we pay attention to the physical body, that helps us to know where there's stress, where there's trauma, by asking, where in my body am I feeling a reaction? Where am I feeling something right now to what's being said or the situation that I'm in? And what does it feel like? That's the first step, is tuning into the physical body. And we talked about how pouring out stress for all, moving towards systemic change, we have to look at things like systemic degrees of stress, marginalized peoples and privilege, and understand oppression and allyship. We also talked about how there's a unique cumulative and body loss within groups of people, and how this affects each and every one of us all over the planet. And we talked about privilege and how, as we did our privilege walk, the more privilege that we have, less we're able to see those around us, behind us, who are more in the margins. The more into the center we get, the more we don't see, and how it's really good to kick ourselves out into that discomfort zone so we can understand this, so we can work towards systemic change for everyone, so that we care to do that. Yes, always. Thank you. And the way to be a social justice ally is to do something in this triangle of keeping the fire alive. Something, either the ideas part or the doing part or the supporting part, and that we can move in and out of any three of those. We just have to stay in the triangle somewhere. So today we're going to come back to spiritual allyship and talk about the relationship between self and others, self-care and care for all, engaging the will in order to help us to move forward, different skills that will help us to do this, and ultimately planning and implementing some way of creating this change. Invest in the millennium. Plant sequoias. Say that your main crop is the forest that you did not plant, that you will not live to harvest. Say that the leaves are harvested when they have rotted into the mold. Wendell Berry. So I want to review the egg diagram for a moment. How each of us has this going on. Our psyche is kind of like an egg where we have a lot of unconscious material, and we're trying to increase our conscious field of awareness. So we're dipping down and up and out. And in the meantime, we're also staying connected to that which is larger than self. And then there's this collective unconscious, which is sort of like out there somewhere. And then while we're spiraling, we're going in and out of our own thing. What happens when two people get together and each one of us is doing this at the same time? So I'm talking, I'm thinking, I'm aware of certain things about what I'm doing and saying and why I'm doing and saying the way I am. And, maybe I'm feeling a little insecure. Maybe I'm talking too fast or too slow. How is everybody taking this? And then you're taking it and you're hearing it and you have things going on in your head, and we're both doing this together, this inner work. And between us, when we consciously say, I am doing my work and you are doing your work, and we're doing it in the same time and place, we're connecting this collective unconscious between us. We're strengthening the collective unconscious between us. Our connection is doing that. And what happens when we get in a group like we are? The collective unconscious becomes a little more collective conscious. And we're working together now toward the same cause. So I call this a bifocal vision, where we are working inside ourselves and we're working with our group. And we need this for allyship. We need to remember that I am doing my inner work, you are doing your inner work, and we are doing this work together. So I invite you to take an eye break, because there's nothing to see over the next bunch of slides. You can look off at the distance, get your long muscle fibers in the eye to have a little exercise, or you can close your eyes, rest your eye sockets. So personal care and caring for all and moving towards systemic change are very interrelated. Self-care promotes health, stamina, strength, flexibility, confidence, clarity, capability, acceptance, forgiveness, compassion. And caring for more than my personal self, caring for each other and the planet, promotes all of the above, and connectivity, belonging, inclusion, expansiveness, growth, harmony, sustainability, and more.
Amy, can I just add one word to that?
Sure.
Is a sense of community, because we've got terms like inclusion. What does actually that mean? It's community.
community.
It's this. This is community. Yeah, so it's just bringing that back to what those words can actually mean again.
Yeah, thank you. So, yeah, lots of love. So, engaging our will help us to stay together, to move forward together, to expand out with others. And the will is made up of 4 parts. I'm going to just talk about it as if it was made up of 4 parts. So we've got the strong will. That's when we say, I am committed. We've got goodwill. That's when we say, it's the right thing to do. There's even a company called Goodwill, and their tagline is, our business is changing lives. We've got divine will, which is that higher purpose, which is statements like, this is bigger than all of us. And then we've got skillful will, which is when we say, I know how to do this. And I saved this one for last because I want to get into this more today, because I often hear people say, I really want to help, I just don't know how. I really want to change the world, I just don't know how. It's too big. I don't know how to even start. So we're going to talk about increasing our ability to feel skillful in order to move towards systemic change. And the 3 things that I've chosen just to talk about today, we can talk a lot more about a lot of things of how to have skills to be able to move towards systemic change. But today I just want to talk about communication skills and something called clean pain, choosing clean pain over something called dirty pain. And another way of interrupting bias, which is calling out and calling in, and when to use them. So we'll start with communication skills. So consider that tree roots in the ground are touching each other, and nature is communicating with each other all around the planet all the time. There's a communication in nature happening all the time. And even though we are nature, we're part of nature, human beings, we don't communicate well in the same way that trees and their roots systems do. So we have to consciously learn how to communicate better with each other. And these are just some things that might be helpful. Nonviolent communication and VC is a wonderful thing to study and to practice. And we'll talk just for a moment about that. The 10 guidelines to listening, 5 guidelines to active listening, 6 communication enhancers, and using I statements. These are things that we all received before the course started. And I don't know if you've had a chance to look at these and to practice these, but we'll talk about them more today, just in case you haven't, and even if you have, we'll get into it more today. So I want to start out talking a little about nonviolent communication. Marshall Rosenberg started nonviolent communication, and I'm going to play just a couple of minutes of this. This is a little bit longer than a couple of minutes. It's about 10 minutes long, but I'm just going to play the first couple of minutes of this tape.
In your 40 years of mediating conflicts between warring factions around the world, what's the most important thing that you do that creates peace between the people involved?
First, I never hear what they think. See, I get called a lot of names by people who hear what I'm saying. I see you've read my book. You probably can recall I was in a refugee camp in Palestinian Authority, and what all the crowd had to do was hear from my interpreter that I was an American, and a gentleman jumps up and screams at me, murderer, and another one jumps up, assassin, and another one calls child killer. Within an hour, the guy that called me a murderer invites me to a Ramadan dinner at his house. I didn't hear what he thought of me. I connected to what he was feeling, what he was needing. As I walked into that refugee camp, there were hundreds of tear gas grenades all over the lawn, shot in the night before when they had a riot there. And on the side of each of the grenades was written, "Made in USA." So when this guy calls me murderer, hearing that I'm an American, I tried to hear, what is the guy feeling? And I said, sir, are you furious? And then I tried to hear his needs. Are you needing a different kind of support from my country than you're getting? And he looks at me in a kind of a stunned way. Apparently that's not the way people respond to him usually when he screams at them. He said, you're damn right. We don't have sewage. We don't have housing. Why are you sending these weapons? So I said, well, then that makes it clear why you'd be so aggravated. If you don't have these basics and you get these weapons sent over here, I can see that your needs are for some other kind of support. He said, do you know what it's like to live under these conditions for all these years? I said, so you'd like me to understand just how desperate it can be even for one day, let alone for many years. So I heard what was alive in the guy, not what he thought I was, a murderer. I didn't say I ain't killed anybody. I tried to hear what was going on in him. And when he trusted that I sincerely cared what he was feeling, what he was needing, he could start to hear me then when I said, look, I'm frustrated right now because I came a long way to be here. I want to offer something. And I'm worried now that because you got me labeled as an American, you ain't going to listen to me. He said, what do you want to say to us? So he could hear me then. And we have a school there now, one of the schools that we call a nonviolent communication school in that refugee camp. And whenever I go to that region, I'm well received hospitably in that refugee camp. But I had to see the human being behind the names that he was calling me.
Being called a name is
I'm going to stop there and invite you to check that out on your own and watch that whole thing. It just is stunning to hear him talk. Yeah. So again, if you want to take an eye break, look away, or just close your eyes. Nothing to see for a little while here. So I'm going to read the 10 guidelines to listening, and I'm going to do it from 10 down so you get a feel for when we're getting to the end. 10. Stop talking. If you're talking, you're not listening. Quiet yourself, your responses, and your interjections. Be open and available to what the other person is seeking through being heard. 9. Get into your listening mode. Quiet the environment, mentally open your mind to hearing, get comfortable, engage in eye contact. 8. Make the speaker feel comfortable. Examples are nodding or using gestures. For children or those in a wheelchair, get at their eye level. 7. Remove distractions. Clear your space, quiet screens, silence your phone, close the door, ask others to give you privacy. 6. Empathize. Compassionately imagine being in this other person's shoes. At the very least, try learning to embrace and wonder at this person's otherness. 5. Be comfortable with silence. Some people need time to formulate a thoughtful response. Rushing them or suggesting what they say robs them of the opportunity to communicate authentically and honestly. 4. Put aside personal prejudice. This is quite difficult as our experiences form who we are. Putting experiences aside is a skill which requires practice. Practice this skill. 3. Heed the tone. Sometimes the tone can hide the meaning of the words. Sometimes the tone enhances the meaning of the words. Check out which is which. 2. Listen for underlying meanings, not words. Listen first for comprehension. Do I understand you? Then a second time for ideas. What are you saying? And 1. Pay attention to nonverbal communication. People communicate through body language and facial expressions, and it's why eye contact is necessary. Now I'm going to read the 5 points of active listening. 1. Listen in order to fully understand what's being said to you. 2. Rephrase what you heard the person say so you can be sure you heard correctly. 3. Ask questions that help you get more information. For example, what did you mean when you said? 4. Offer encouragement and support. And 5. Ask how the person feels and be careful not to assume that you know their feelings. I'm going to read the 6 communication enhancers versus communication blockers. Communication enhancer number 1. Ask for more information and problem solve together, instead of the communication blocker blaming and attacking. 2. Make eye contact. Lean toward the other person. Give your full attention, instead of being distracted. 3. Show empathy, validate the other person's feelings, instead of dismissing and making light of someone's problems. 4. Stay silent until the person is finished speaking, instead of interrupting. 5. Withhold judgment, instead of lecturing and moralizing. 6. Use yes and statements instead of yes but statements. All right, I'm going to go through some I statements, and I hope you're not getting too bored hearing my voice. I hope your eyes are resting. Yeah, no, good, okay. Eyes are resting. Look off in the distance. Take a break with your eyes. I statements are free of expectations. They focus on your own feelings and experiences. They do not focus on your perspective of what the other person has done or failed to do. An example of an I statement is, I feel I'm not given adequate time to share my thoughts, versus a you statement, you talk too much and never ask me what I think. Feel inside of yourself what it feels like to hear those two statements. Usually, you statements bring up defensiveness. I statements help you to express your experience in a way that doesn't attack, criticize, or blame others. It decreases defensiveness and hostility, which escalate conflicts. And it decreases shutting down or tuning out, which stifles communication. I statements help create more opportunities for the resolution of conflict. There's a template that we could use, pretty simple template, on how to create an I statement. It has 4 steps. How I feel, for example, I feel frustrated. 2, what you have that feeling about, for example, about the way you interrupted me. 3, why you feel this way, for example, because I was unable to finish my thought process. 4, what you would like to see instead, for example, I would prefer to be given a 1-minute warning sign to wrap up my point when there's a time concern, or given time to finish my thought completely when there's no time concern. Some examples of how to create I statements from you statements. Often we start with the you statement. If we take a few breaths, and think inside, how can I reframe this to an I statement? We might come up with these examples. Maybe we want to say, you never listen to anyone and you're not really listening to me right now. If we take a few breaths and change that to an I statement, it might sound like, I feel frustrated that my concerns are not being heard. Here's another example. I hate when you yell at the kids. Can become, I feel frustrated when you yell and swear at the kids because I want them to be respected. Here's another one. You screw up everyone's schedule. It could be, I feel frustrated and we can't start our meetings on time when you come in late. And this is a good one to use at work if you feel like you're in this position. The salaries in this department are totally inequitable and discriminatory. It could become, I feel frustrated by the salary structure in this department. I am among the lowest paid here, and that makes me feel underappreciated. I would like to understand more about how salaries are calculated, and I would like to talk to you about whether raising my salary is possible in the next budget cycle. All right, so I want to talk about clean pain. Clean pain is when you know what to say or do and you really don't want to say it, but you do it anyway. Clean pain is responding from the best parts of yourself. And when we do clean pain, we mend trauma and we build our capacity for growth. Leaders metabolize trauma by using clean pain, as opposed to dirty pain. Dirty pain is when we choose avoidance, blame, or denial. Dirty pain is responding from your most wounded parts of yourself. And dirty pain ultimately reinforces traumatic retention and perpetuates intergenerational and historic trauma. Interrupting bias. Remember we talked about developing curious mind, to get curious about this other person and their uniqueness, your inner reactions to the other person and their uniqueness. The gift of internalized biases uncovered, and how to transform or release those biases. So understanding unconscious bias describes situations where our background, personal experiences, societal stereotypes, cultural context, things like that, impact our decisions and actions without us realizing. We can unduly and unknowingly experience or perpetuate the negative forces of unconscious bias. Exposing our unconscious bias is extremely complex because we don't always admit that we have bias. So the first step is to be open to the idea that we are biased. And then ask questions like, what does unconscious bias look like? Would I know if I saw it? Would I know if I had it? One way to interrupt unconscious bias within ourselves is to review our internal conversation. Oops, it's not supposed to say, am I? It's not supposed to say, ami, it's supposed to say, am. Am I basing my decisions on 30-second judgments or quantitative and qualitative information? What are the various aspects of my personal story that point to unconscious bias? Who do I trust and why? Another one is decrease exclusivity. When I give attention and time to those who look like me in terms of age, gender, race, academia, etc., I reinforce unconscious bias. Develop a core value system with a focus on fair treatment and respect for others. And change your lens. Acknowledge that we are all biased to some extent. Tell yourself, I have biases. I am interested in knowing what they are and changing them. Consider your interactions through the lens of internal bias. Catch yourself excluding others and change your actions. Don't let internal bias hold you or others back. Ways of interrupting bias when we're talking with others. There's two ways. One is called calling out. One is called calling in. Use calling out to let someone know their words or actions are unacceptable and will not be tolerated. Use calling out to interrupt in order to prevent further harm. Use calling out even though it will likely feel hard and uncomfortable, but it feels necessary. And use calling out to hit the pause button and break the momentum. Use calling in to explore more deeply, make more meaning together, and find a mutual sense of understanding across a difference. Use calling in to understand or to learn more, to help imagine different perspectives, possibilities, or outcomes, to gain multiple perspectives and to encourage paradigm shifts. Use calling in when focused on reflection, not reaction. And try to use calling in without it being a suggestion with an uptick, like, don't you think you should? So I'm going to ask everybody to come on board with this. I don't know if you all can read this. Can everybody read these words, or is it too small? You're okay, everybody? Read these, yeah? All right, what I'm going to ask you to do is, there are 7 of us, right? So I'm going to put us in order, and you just remember who's before you, okay? So I'm going to go in order of who is on my screen. So I'm going to start. Jonas, you're right after me. Allie, you're after Jonas. Richard, you're after Allie. Kat, you're after Richard. Nancy, you're after Kat. Remy, you're after Nancy. And then I'm after Remy. So remember who you're after, and we're just going to read. We'll take turns. I'll read the first one here. Jonas will read the second one down the column, and so forth. And then we'll start at the top, and we'll read through, and we'll stop right here at the end of calling out. Okay? So let's start with reading through calling out, and you can unmute, and we'll just go right after each other. Wow. Nope. Ouch. I need to stop you right there.
Okay, I am having a strong reaction to that, and I need to let you know why.
Maybe you want to think this one through a bit more and speak about it later.
Sex, gender, gender identity, gender expression, race, class, ethnicity, religion, ability, immigration status, body type, marital status, age, pregnancy relevant to your point? How?
Thank you, Richard. It sounds like you're making some assumptions that we need to unpack a bit.
That word comment is really triggering and offensive. Be mindful and pick a different word.
Whoops. Unmute, Remy.
Sorry. I don't find that funny. Tell me why that's funny to you.
I need you to know how your comment just landed on me.
It sounded like you just said blank. Is that really what you meant?
You may or may not realize this, but you're talking about me, my story, my identity markers.
I need to push back against that. I disagree. I don't see it that way.
Thank you, Richard. I wonder if you considered the impact of your words.
That's not our culture here. Those aren't our values.
I feel obligated as your peer, colleague, coworker, friend, supervisor to tell you that your comment wasn't okay.
I need to leave the room if the conversation is going to continue down this road. And I want to stop here for a second. So those were all examples of things that we can say to someone when we feel like calling out is very necessary. So Jonas, why don't you start us on now what we want to say when we feel like calling in is necessary?
I'm curious. What was your intention when you said that?
How might someone else see this differently? Is it possible that someone might misinterpret your words or actions?
What criteria are you using to measure or assess?
What do you assume to be true about blank?
Why do you think that is the case? Why do you believe that to be true?
Right? Why did the result or response cause a problem for you?
How might the impact of your words or actions differ from your intent?
How might your own comfort level, assumptions, expectations, prior experiences be influencing your beliefs, decisions, process?
How did you decide, determine, conclude?
Why is this the best way to proceed? What other approaches have you considered?
Why do you think others haven't moved in that direction?
What would other stakeholders say or think or feel?
What sort of impact do you think your decision, comment, action might have?
How is blank different from blank? What is the connection between blank and blank?
What would have to change in order for blank?
What is making you the most fearful, nervous, uncomfortable, or worried?
How do you know it's working?
In your opinion, what is the best case scenario?
Thank you for reading those. And I just want to add in these little notes that it's powerful. The reason that we want to call out is it's powerful for the target of oppression to hear these words from the mouth of an ally. Also, the reason we want to call in is because it offers a lot more communion with each other. So think to yourself, how might I call out the behavior while calling in the person? All right, while everybody's stretching, take your eye break. Don't have to look at the screen. So I'm going to read to you some things about culture. What is culture? Culture is how our bodies retain and reenact history through the foods we eat or refuse to eat, the stories we tell, the things that hold meaning for us, the images that move us, what we're able and unable to sense or feel or process, the way we see the world. And culture is 1,000 other aspects of life. How do things become culture? Well, Resmaa Menakem says, if enough people do the same thing over and over, or if they share something with each other enough times, eventually it becomes culture. Resmaa also says, change takes time, do not despair. Black bodies have suffered repression, torture, and murder by white bodies for 4 centuries. During medieval times, white bodies suffered repression, torture, and murder by other white bodies for a millennium. In comparison, a healing process that evolves over a generation or 2 or 3 or 4 is not so long. Just got to keep at it. Within us all, there's a deep instinctual need to change, born from something larger and greater than the personal self. Different people have different words for this. Some words are source, energetic field, soul, universal self, consciousness, God. Moving towards systemic change through cultural change. Culture lives in our bodies, and so it trumps all things cognitive, ideas, philosophies, convictions, principles, laws. If we can change the culture, we'll change lives. If we can change lives, we'll change the course of history. Strategy means nothing to our lizard brains. When strategy competes with culture, culture wins every time, because culture creates a sense of belonging and safety, which ultimately leads us to value and meaning. We can never belong to a strategy or a movement. We can only belong to a culture. Cultural change is possible. History is full of profound cultural shifts. I don't know if you all remember the example of in Texas, part of the Texas culture was to, kind of a rednecky thing, to throw cans and litter out the window of the car. And it became a huge problem. And the state of Texas came up with a new strategy to create a new culture for Texans to think of themselves as responsible for their state. And there was a lot of marketing about how to be a good Texan is, keep your place clean. And it changed. It worked. To create cultural change, subcultures need to develop their own stories, symbols, rituals, role models, elders, etc. So Resmaa Menakem, as we were introduced to, talked about white bodies, black bodies, and blue bodies being like police officers and security personnel. And Resma says that we cannot possibly all change our culture together as it stands right now. White bodies need to change their own culture. Black bodies need to change their own culture. Blue bodies need to change their own culture. But we should do this at the same time, simultaneously. And we should collaborate, coordinate, and cooperate, especially around social activism. So again, if you're not standing and you're not breathing and you're not stretching and you want to, please do. Take an eye break. People who are consciously open to change may not have caused all of their problems, but they have to solve them anyway. Marsha Linehan. Essential aspects of creating changing culture. 1. Develop and uplift elders and eldership to provide mentoring and guidance for the next generation. 2. Create, tell, and pass on new stories with narratives of resilience, compassion, achievement, and transformation. 3. Do this consistently, repetitively. 4. Create body-centered rituals and practices that promote self-care and collective wellness and pass these on to our children. 5. Slow down and settle, giving more energy to love, compassion, and regard. Nurture individual and collective willingness to be in our bodies, to accept and metabolize clean pain, and to heal. Lead and follow by example and model the way for others. Jonas, would you talk to us about the 4 directions of relationships, please?
Absolutely, because relationships are really so key in leading this positive cultural change in our society and our world. And it's important to understand all the different directions of these relationships. I like to use the metaphor or this analogy of a compass in the 4 directions of relationships. And we can start by looking at going down south. So if we're starting in the center and going down south, that's our followers. It's the people who we mentor. It's the people who look to us for guidance. It's people who are where we used to be. It's the people who just look up to us for guidance in some way. So the question there is, how are we being a positive role model for the people who are stepping into themselves and stepping into the direction of where they want to go? How are we being a positive role model for them? And then when we go east to west or west to east on this plane, that's our peers. And peers can be defined rather lucidly, depending on the context. It might mean literally the people of the same age. Maybe it's the people we went to school with. Maybe it's the people who they work at the same company as us. Maybe it's our friends. Maybe it's our family. So it's the idea of what, or perhaps they belong to the same club. So who are our peers? It's the people who that we can confide in and who can confide in us. We're all headed in the same direction, more or less doing the same thing, depending on the context. And the question there is, how are we supporting each other? How are we speaking value to them? How are they supporting us? What can we do to support each other towards this systemic change? And now heading north, these are the people we look up to, just like south when the people looking up to us, thinking about who are our own role models. Who do we look up to? Who do we admire for the way that they live their lives and lead by example? Who are these people? It might literally be a mentor, someone that we speak with and connect with on a regular basis. It might also be authors of books, someone you've never met personally, but you know them intimately through their words. Maybe it's someone who delivers a TED talk. Maybe it's a teacher. There's any number of ways to define a leader. So the question is, how are these people inspiring and motivating us to stay the course, to lead towards this positive change that we wish to see in our culture and our society? So we've talked about our followers, our peers, and our leaders. And lastly, and I dare say this is probably the most important one, because no matter where you go, there you are. No matter what happens in your life, you're always going to have yourself. How is your relationship with yourself in what you've done and in what you've failed to do? How is your relationship with yourself? How are you leading yourself towards living and leading towards the change that you want to see in our society, in our culture, in our world? How are you atoning for past transgressions that you hold yourself responsible for? How are you acting as a positive role model for the times that you have lived up to your own value system of this change that you wish to see? How are you living up to that? How is your relationship with yourself? And we don't have to beat ourselves up, but we also don't have to rest on our laurels as well. So doing a check-in with where you are with yourself, with your peers, with your mentors, your leaders, and with the people who follow. And then ultimately the question is, where are your strengths in this compass? Where are you really strong in these relationships? And then on the other side, where could it use some work? Where could it use some work? It's great to lean into your strengths, but it's also good to, I like to use the metaphor of the sailboat, which is why we have the sailboat here. We can lift our sails. That's relying on our strengths, but then plugging up the holes in the ship can also keep us afloat, right? So where do we need to plug up the holes, and when can we lift our sails? Thank you for allowing me to share that.
So if you don't have your journal out, get your journal out and get it ready. And we're going to start first with closing our eyes. Before we journal, we're going to imagine. Close your eyes, get to your inner vision. Notice your breath breathing your body. And now imagine, what is a realistic, ideal future for all? What does that look like? What does it smell like? What does it sound like? What does it feel like? And when you're ready, you can open your eyes and do a little journaling about what you saw. And as you journal about it, consider what the systemic changes that are necessary to get from here to there might be. Consider the steps that it would take to get from here to there. Consider the order of those steps. Consider what the first step is, and if you can, break that step down as much as you can. And ultimately, what's the simplest thing to accomplish right now? And ultimately, how would you do it? When would you do it? Where would you do it? Once we get to that first step and we do it, then we can continue to do this process and work on this one step at a time. My suggestion is ultimately that we don't do it alone, that we share, we find our team, we collaborate. Changing the world is a big project. We need each other.
I'd like to chime in and offer another consideration on that last one.
Sure.
What knowledge, skills, resources, or support might we need in order to get there? And the encouraging thing there is, if we don't currently have those, well, that becomes our first step.
Mm-hmm.
Gaining those knowledge, skills, resources, support to create our opportunities.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great. Love it. Thank you, Jonas.
Just to add to that last point there, Jonas, again, those two words, awareness and responsibility, actually being aware of where we so much might be lacking, but where we might need new skills, new perspectives, even and attitudes. This is just thinking about what Kathy's just said there. That's an example of awareness put to good work. Yeah, so we become aware of what internal resources we have to bring to bear. And it's at that point that we can start taking responsibility for that very change, a change within ourselves, and that inevitably cascades out through groups like this and just in daily conversations. The culture is changing and will inevitably.
So this week I'm going to ask everybody in with your partners and on your own to also consider about things like whiteness and white culture. Maybe list neutral, positive, negative characteristics, traits, beliefs, attitudes. To think about and maybe talk with each other about how is white culture similar or different around the world, like in the US and British white culture. And maybe talk about the myth of white fragility and facing white rage and white supremacy, both internally and externally. Maybe have a discussion about the irrational self and how it plays into perpetuating bias, racism, and trauma. How industrial growth, social growth, urbanization, colonization helped and still help to create white culture and racism. And maybe talk about the great unraveling precedes the great turning. We have to unravel things before we can move forward and put them together in a different way, including questioning or unquestioned authority, questioning unquestioned authority, the underpinnings of how we're now living, and realizing that we're living in a broken society, an unsafe world, and how do we change that? These resources are huge. These are just a dip in the ocean, just a little spit in the ocean. They're important, and you start with your own resources and use these if you want some more. There's lots of resources here. I would say that if you don't have My Grandmother's Hands by Resmaa Menakem, get that, borrow it from the library, get it free online, and if nothing more, read chapter 21, Whiteness Without Supremacy. That gives some really good ideas of how to move forward in our new culture, from white culture toward a new culture without supremacy. Lots and lots and lots of resources. Help yourself to look at these resources and check them out. Check off the ones that you've done and the ones you want to do again, the ones you want to get deeper in with, or the ones that you've been curious about. And then this week, again, I'd love you to discuss the essential aspects of creating changing culture. Maybe go through that again. Your vision of your realistic ideal future and the steps. The step that you want to accomplish now, do it. Talk with each other about it. Get some support. Maybe do it together if that's appropriate. And check out and discuss all these considerations and resources that I just went through those last few slides. So we are going to close us up. Let's take a few breaths together first. Come into this moment and the love that we have for each other, this family that we're forming, this community. Breathing and smiling feels so good. All right, so I'm going to ask everybody to unmute and have this awesome, chaotic love fest. Say everything that you want to say that's loving to each other all together.
I'm so thankful for this whole
Thanks
group.
everybody.
Remy, I love your
Oh
hat.
my
It
God,
looks
it's
so
so
cozy.
Thank you.
Richard, you look like you're feeling better. That's
Thank you,
great.
Remy. Thank you, Nancy.
Nancy,
Thank you,
so
Love
Richard.
you
good
all
to
so
connect
much.
with
Jonas and
you.
Richard, it's been
Kat,
great
love
chatting
you.
Love you,
So
Remy.
happy
Love you,
for
Allie.
you.
Love you,
It's
Jonas.
so good.
Love you,
Jonas,
chatting more
love you
and
so
Blessings and
much.
love.
about
It's the
relationships.
Keep
best.
playing that ukulele.
Blessings and love.
You.
Thank you,
Blessings and love.
Ami.